It happens in a flash, a scream, the roar of flames, the collapse of everything once known. There's a siren in the distance, a neighbor's voice shouting, a figure banging on a window, but soon all that remains is smoke. The air is thick and silent, charred wood, scorched earth, and the heavy stillness that always seems to follow when something holy leaves the physical world. You can feel it, even if you've never been there. Something about the aftermath of fire leaves a strange imprint on the heart, a sense that something sacred and terrifying has occurred. Something final, and yet, long after the embers cool and the ground settles into quiet, a question lingers like a whisper in the back of your consciousness. A question most people are too afraid to ask. Not because they don't want to know, but because they're terrified of what the answer might be. What happens to the soul of someone who burns to death? Not just any death, not a quiet passing in a hospital bed surrounded by family, nor a drifting away in one's sleep with peace in the air, but fire, a force so primal, so violent, so consuming, a death that evokes horror before it evokes sorrow. There's something in us that recoils at the thought. The body, something we've known, loved, cared for, all our lives, reduced to ash. We imagine pain, panic, suffocation. We picture terror in the eyes, and because the body is what we've been trained to identify with, we assume the soul suffers with it. This question, unspoken in most circles, isn't just a morbid curiosity, it's a spiritual ache. Because, if fire can destroy the body so completely, can it reach the soul? Can it touch that eternal spark within us? Is there something merciful hidden inside such a brutal transition? Or is the soul scorched along with the flesh? The truth is, most people are too uncomfortable to explore this deeply. Death by fire challenges our illusions of safety, our desire for control. It offends the tidy narratives we use to cope with loss. So we avoid it, we change the subject. We light candles, offer prayers, and then move on. But the soul doesn't move on just because we do. And the soul of someone who departed through fire deserves more than silence. It deserves to be understood. You might have felt this question gnawing at the edges of your awareness before. Maybe it came after a news story, a house fire, a car accident, a wildfire tragedy. Maybe it was more personal. Maybe someone you loved departed that way, and no matter how many people tried to console you, something inside you knew they weren't answering the deeper question. Did they suffer? Where did they go? Did their soul survive? If you're asking these things, you're not morbid, you're awake. Awake enough to know that physical death is not the end, but a doorway. Awake enough to sense that there is more happening in the moments of death than what the eyes can perceive or what science can record. Because for all our technology, all our language, all our cultural rituals around death, this particular kind of passing still sits in the shadow, still makes people shudder. And the deeper reason is simple. It reveals how little we really understand about the soul. When someone dies in a fire, what we see is destruction. We see chaos. But what if that's only because we're looking through the wrong lens? What if, beyond the smoke, beyond the sirens, beyond the charred remains, something sacred is unfolding? What if, instead of being destroyed, the soul is being lifted? The world isn't ready to answer that, but you are, and that's why you're here. Not just listening, not just watching, but remembering, because deep down, there's a part of you that already knows. You've felt it before in dreams, in moments of quiet, in the strange knowing that sometimes washes over you when you hear about death and don't feel fear, but something else, reverence. We've been taught to associate fire with punishment, with judgment, with hell. But ancient wisdom tells a different story. Fire is not the enemy of the soul. It is the revealer of truth. It strips away the false. It burns through the illusion of separation. And in its purest form, it is a portal, not to pain, but to transformation. Still, that doesn't answer the question, not yet. You want to know what actually happens, not metaphors, not poetry, but the real thing. What does the soul experience when the body is consumed by flame? Is there agony, or is there mercy? These are the questions we'll be exploring, not through guesses or fear-based theology, but through a deeper lens, through the consciousness of the soul itself. Because the soul, unlike the body, does not burn, it does not scream, it does not wither or blacken or vanish into smoke. It is not subject to the laws of flesh and blood. And because of that, what the soul experiences during death, especially a death involving intense physical trauma, is something far different than what we assume. You might think, but how do we know? And the answer lies in the whispers of ancient mystics, in the patterns of near-death experiences, in the wisdom that has survived underground, away from the noise of modern thought. These are not just theories, they are echoes of what countless souls have remembered after coming back from the brink, and what they reveal is this: the soul is not trapped in the pain. The soul is not victim to the body's final moments. There is something far more miraculous occurring, and it begins before the first scream is ever heard. But we haven't been taught to see this. We've been conditioned to believe that suffering is the full story, that if something looks terrifying, then it must be. And that belief is the first veil that must be lifted. Because once you understand what really happens, not just to the body, but to the soul, everything shifts. Not just your fear of fire, but your fear of death itself. You begin to realize that the universe is far more loving, far more intelligent than we've ever been led to believe. That nothing happens by accident. That even in the most tragic, shocking moments, there is a hidden grace guiding the soul toward something greater. And that includes the soul who departs through fire. So, if you've been carrying this question in your heart, if the image of fire has haunted you, if the memory of someone you lost continues to ache in your chest, you're not alone. And you're not crazy for needing to know. In fact, that need is sacred. It means you're ready. Ready to unlearn the fear. Ready to open to a truth that most never touch. Ready to remember that nothing, not even fire, can destroy what is eternal. Because in the darkness left behind by the flames, there is still a light, and that light is the soul, untouched, rising, watching, becoming. Now the question becomes, how does that happen? And that's where our journey begins. The moment it happens, everything changes. 1 second, you're in your body, aware of pain, fear, confusion, and the next, there's a shift, a deep, almost inaudible silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of transition. As fire touches flesh, the physical body screams out in alarm. But what most people don't realize is that your soul doesn't stay for the whole thing. It never does. You've been taught to believe that death is a moment, a hard stop, a dramatic collapse, but it's not. It's a process. And in the case of death by fire, this process begins before the body fully gives in. As the temperature rises, the body reacts instantly. Your nervous system sends frantic messages, adrenaline surges, pain signals flood every inch of your awareness. But just as the pain begins to climb toward the unbearable, something sacred happens, something merciful. A higher intelligence steps in, a mechanism built into the very architecture of your soul. You begin to separate. This isn't about escapism. This is design. A divine fail-safe coded into your being, what some call compassionate displacement. It's not a doctrine or a belief system. It's an experience, one that countless near-death survivors, spiritual mystics, and even trauma doctors have quietly acknowledged for decades. Right at the edge of suffering, when the pain threatens to consume you, your consciousness is pulled back, detached, displaced with compassion. It's as if your higher self says, you don't need to carry this. There are many Tarsin Gopins with a cane. You see, your soul isn't bound to your body the way you've been taught. It's tethered, yes, but the cord that connects the two is flexible, it's protective. And in cases of extreme trauma, especially trauma that happens quickly and without mercy, that cord loosens. Not just to save the soul from torment, but to preserve its clarity. Because pain this intense can cause confusion, fragmentation, fear imprints. So, the soul is lovingly drawn away, almost like a child being pulled out of a burning building by an unseen hand. For those watching from the outside, a body burning in flames looks like the ultimate torment. But from the inside, from the spiritual dimension, the CD, it's rarely experienced in full. The separation happens fast. In some cases, before the flames even fully consume the skin, the consciousness has already stepped out. Time stretches, seconds become lifetimes. And in that space, something sacred opens. It's not always light, not always bliss, but it is protection. Many souls, especially those who have done spiritual work in life, meditation, prayer, healing, forgiveness, are able to recognize what's happening in those initial seconds. They don't panic. Instead, they surrender. Not in weakness, but in wisdom. They feel the presence, that greater knowing, and they trust the shift. It feels like floating. Like being gently lifted from chaos into calm. The body may still be writhing, reacting, deteriorating, but the soul is watching, not feeling, witnessing, not burning. And even when the transition isn't peaceful, even when the soul clings for a few seconds longer, compassionate displacement still activates. It has to. It's part of how the universe guards its most sacred creation, consciousness itself. The soul, after all, is not meant to be tortured. It can endure challenge, yes, but it is not built to be annihilated by pain, especially not in the final moment of this incarnation. What often happens instead is that the soul slips into what mystics call the midway layer, a liminal realm that sits between life and full transition. In this space, you're no longer fully in the body, but not yet fully in the afterstate. It's here that the first realizations begin to dawn, that the body is no longer required, that the suffering is not yours, that you are, somehow, still you. This layer is soft, clouded in light, or sometimes pure neutrality. There's no fire here, no panic, just awareness. And in that awareness, there's a choice, though most don't realize it, as a choice. You can cling, or you can release. You can hover near the wreckage, or you can rise. And most souls, in those first few seconds, rise. Not because they're pushed, but because the pull toward peace is so strong, so overwhelming, that resistance becomes impossible. But this doesn't mean there's no confusion, especially for souls who weren't spiritually prepared, who believed death was the end, who lived disconnected from the inner realms. For them, the first few seconds after separation can be disorienting. They may attempt to re-enter the body, not realizing it's already too late. They may try to speak, cry out, make contact, but the body doesn't respond. It's already emptying. It's already closing the door. And yet, even in these cases, compassionate displacement doesn't leave them alone. Guides arrive, not always visible, but deeply felt. Sometimes in the form of past loved ones, sometimes as pure presence, like a wave of calm pressing against the chaos. These guides don't force. They offer a hand, a sense, a knowing. And once the soul understands, once it accepts the truth of its detachment, it lets go. And when it does, the real journey begins. But let's stay in these first seconds a little longer, because this is the part no one talks about, the part that matters most. As the body burns, something else ignites, 1990, a flickering awareness that this isn't the end, that the pain, though real for the body, is not eternal for the soul, that the experience is passing, not defining. This is the moment where fear either dissolves or deepens. And here's the truth. For most, it dissolves. Even if the soul was afraid of death in life, not it is true, even if it fought it, feared it, denied it, in the moment of separation, all of that melts. Not because the soul becomes enlightened in an instant, but because it's suddenly flooded with a sense of being held, watched, cared for, and in that care, something ancient and divine takes over. You may not remember it now, but you've died before, many times. And every time, this same force has carried you. Across fire, water, violence, illness, IOLs, the body may scream, but the soul always remembers the way home. The memory is buried deep, but in those final seconds, it reactivates. Like an internal GPS, rerouting your consciousness towards source. That's not poetic language, it's real. You feel it. The direction, the light, the calling back. So, what really happens in those first seconds after death by fire? The soul begins to remember. It remembers that it cannot die, that what it's leaving behind is a garment, a tool, a temporary vehicle. It remembers the patterns of return, the cycles of rebirth, and the timeless presence that has always guided it. The fire becomes irrelevant. The pain becomes background noise, and the soul, no longer tethered by flesh, begins to rise. What you call death is, especially in a moment as extreme as burning, is not a punishment. It's not even an ending. It's a return, and the first few seconds are the first breath of that return. There is a moment, quiet and unseen, that occurs in the deepest threshold between the physical and the eternal. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or spectacle. There is no flash of light that human eyes can witness, no audible cue to alert those left behind, but it happens all the same, in the very instant that the body can no longer sustain itself within the storm of fire. Something ancient and intelligent awakens within the soul. It begins to move, not in panic, not in chaos, but with the calm precision of a divine architect, enacting a design written long before birth. This is the sacred separation. You've been taught to think of death as something sudden, abrupt, like a cord being cut, or a door being slammed shut. But that's not how it really unfolds, especially not in cases of extreme physical trauma. The soul is not yanked from the body like a light switched off in an emergency. Instead, it begins a process, one that is gentle, gradual, and exquisitely aware. Like mist rising from the surface of a still lake, the soul begins to lift, not all at once, but layer by layer, as if it knows, on some deep and cosmic level, that it must leave in stages, that to rush this journey would disrupt something sacred. Imagine, if you can, your consciousness beginning to release itself from every tether it has held to the physical form. Not as a desperate escape, but as a sacred unfolding. Each fiber of identity, each energetic thread once bound to bone and blood, slowly dissolves its hold. The pain that the body may be registering is not absorbed by the soul. It is as though the soul steps back, observing, present but not imprisoned. Like watching a movie you're no longer inside, the soul begins to hover in a state of widening clarity, remembering what it truly is. This untethering is not cold or clinical, it's not mechanical, it is full of wisdom and grace. The soul is not simply floating aimlessly, detached from reality. It is being guided, watched over, assisted. All around it, luminous presences begin to gather, beings made not of flesh or form but of radiance, light beings, not fantasies or imagined entities, but real intelligences that exist beyond the physical plane. These are not strangers, they are familiar. The soul recognizes them the way you might recognize the scent of home after years away. They've been here before, you've known them before. And now, they've returned to help carry you through this most delicate crossing. Their presence is unlike anything you've ever known. They do not speak in words, but in frequencies of peace. You don't hear them, you feel them. They are not rescuers in the way we think of rescue, because there is nothing broken to fix. Instead, they are witnesses, guardians, midwives of the soul's return. Their role is not to pull you from the body, but to hold space as you remember how to leave it. And so the separation continues. With every breath the body tries to take, the soul breathes deeper into its freedom. With every moment the body clings to survival, the soul prepares to surrender. But not in defeat, in transcendence. It's not letting go out of fear, but out of understanding. The fire that consumes the body does not chase the soul. It cannot reach it. The flames, no matter how wild, are earthly. The soul is not. As you rise, you may begin to notice a shift in your perception. Things that once held weight, pain, fear, confusion, begin to dissolve. It's not that you forget them. It's that they lose their grip on you. You begin to see not just the fire, but the energy moving beneath it. Not just the body, but the light it once carried. You see the beauty of the design, even in the destruction. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that this isn't the end of anything. It's a returning, and while this process may only take seconds in linear time, from the soul's perspective, it feels like eternity expanding and collapsing at once. There is no panic, no rush. The body's final moments are surrounded by a cocoon of divine intelligence, orchestrated with more care than any symphony, guided by more love than the mind can hold, every cell releasing, every thread of energy detaching, and finally, a deep exhale, not from the lungs, but from the spirit itself. The soul fully rises. At this point, you are no longer hovering, you are ascending, not in a vertical sense, but in frequency. You move into a space that cannot be measured by distance, only by vibration. The light beings remain with you, not as instructors, but as companions. They are proud, not because you survived the fire, but because you remembered who you were in the midst of it. You remembered that the body is not your home. That pain is not your identity. That death is not your end. What's even more astonishing is that during this sacred separation, the soul often retains a crystalline awareness of both worlds at once. It can sense the grief of loved ones who are just now realizing what has happened. It can hear the cries, feel the confusion, but it is not overwhelmed. It watches with compassion, sending waves of calm, of reassurance. It knows that those left behind see the flames, but not the rising. They see the loss, but not the liberation. And this is one of the great tragedies of human perception, not the death itself, but our blindness to what actually occurs in those final moments. We see only the ending. We imagine agony. But the soul, freed from the confines of matter, experiences a return to vastness, to truth, to a state beyond suffering. And in that space, surrounded by light, it remembers that it was never just the body. It was never the fear. It was always something more. You may wonder why this process is hidden from us, why we can't see the light beings, why we don't witness the rising. The answer is not that these things are unreal, but that our current dimension cannot hold their frequency. It would be like trying to play a symphony through a broken speaker. The signal is there, but the receiver is not yet tuned. And so, in this world, the sacred separation looks like loss, but from the soul's vantage point, it is an awakening. There's something deeply comforting in that, isn't there? To know that even in what appears to be one of the most terrifying forms of death, there is order, there is grace. The soul is not abandoned to chaos. It is carried, held, honored. Every flame that touches the body is matched by a frequency of light that lifts the spirit higher. Every second of separation is guided by divine design. You are never alone, not even in death. And so the untethering continues, until finally, all cords are released, all attachments dissolved. What remains is you, not the name, not the history, not the trauma, but the truth. The radiant essence you've always been. Floating, yes, but more importantly, remembering. Remembering that you were never the fire, you were never the pain, you are the one who rose from it. Untouched, unbroken, free. The moment the soul begins to release its hold on the body, something extraordinary unfolds, something that defies everything you've been taught about pain, fear, and death. You've been conditioned to believe that suffering is inevitable in a violent or tragic death, especially in something as terrifying as being consumed by fire. But from the soul's perspective, that's not the reality at all. In fact, the deeper truth is far more liberating, far more mystical, and far more compassionate than you might ever have imagined. You see, the soul doesn't experience suffering the way the body does. Suffering, in the physical sense, is a function of the nervous system, myasthenia, of chemical signals, electrical impulses, tissue damage, and trauma response. But once the soul begins to disconnect, once it loosens from the body's systems, it no longer participates in that suffering. The agony you may perceive from the outside, the desperation of a body caught in flames or crushed by impact, is not what the soul actually experiences. The soul watches, but it doesn't feel in the same way. It becomes a witness, and not just a passive one. It observes with a clarity, a stillness, a breadth of vision that's impossible to describe unless you've touched that state yourself, through meditation, deep spiritual practice, or a brush with death. This witnessing is what many call non-local observation. In that space, you're no longer anchored behind your eyes or locked inside your body. You're above it, around it, within and beyond it, all at once. You observe not as a trapped identity, but as awareness itself. This isn't fantasy. This isn't wishful thinking. This has been echoed in thousands, yes, thousands, of near-death experiences. People who flatlined, who were clinically dead for moments or minutes, who had no heartbeat, no measurable brain activity, no oxygen, and yet when they were revived, they spoke of floating above the scene, watching as medical teams scrambled, watching loved ones cry, sometimes even hearing conversations that happened in rooms their physical ears couldn't possibly access. But here's the part that matters most. Almost all of them reported feeling calm, peaceful, detached, as though they were wrapped in something soft, luminous, and unshakable. They didn't feel the trauma. They didn't scream from the outside. They observed. They knew. They saw everything unfolding, but from a place beyond panic, a higher vantage point. And that vantage point wasn't just spatial. It was spiritual, emotional, conscious. Imagine for a moment watching the scene of your own passing as though you're watching a memory, not in fear, not in horror, but with a knowing that this moment, no matter how dramatic it appears, is not the end, that there is purpose unfolding, even in what others might call tragedy. This is the perspective the soul takes. Not always instantly, not always with full understanding, but sooner than you might think. There's a kind of divine hush that settles in once you leave the body. Not silence exactly, but an inner quiet, a weightless knowing. You realize very quickly you are not the body. You never were. You used it, yes, inhabited it like a home, but you are not that flesh. You are not those bones. You are not the screams or the shaking or the fading heartbeat. You are what remains, what observes, what rises. And it's from this rising place that witnessing occurs. For many souls, this happens almost immediately after death. They find themselves hovering, watching the scene from above. Some describe it as like floating on the ceiling. Others say they were outside the building, watching through walls. Still others recall being suspended in a kind of light, not white light, but more like a space that holds you gently, and in that place, fear dissolves. Not because the situation isn't intense, but because the soul has stepped into a higher order of understanding. It knows it is safe. This might be difficult to accept if you've lost someone in a horrific way. You might carry pain, questions, guilt, wondering what they felt, what they endured. But if you could only glimpse what they glimpsed, if you could only see what they saw once they left the body, you'd realize that suffering didn't define their exit. Awareness did. Love did. Expansion did. And yes, there are cases where the soul lingers near the body for a while, especially if death was sudden or unexpected. But even then, the dominant feeling reported isn't agony. It's confusion, curiosity, sometimes concern for loved ones left behind. But the terror, the burning, the brutality, that doesn't translate to the soul in the way we assume. Because you, as the soul, are already transitioning. You're already remembering, already beginning to orient yourself not to pain, but to purpose. And here's the most beautiful part. The soul doesn't witness alone. You are not left in the dark, hovering in a void. There are presences, guides, ancestors, beings of light, who arrive the moment your awareness lifts, sometimes before. They don't always appear with trumpets and visions. Sometimes their presence is just a deep feeling, like being wrapped in the calmest, warmest silence you've ever known. They are there to help you see, to help you understand, and to help you rise. Some near-death accounts speak of panoramic life reviews, moments when, just after death, souls are shown every major choice, every ripple of impact, every act of love or harm they ever committed, not as judgment, but as understanding. These moments come not with punishment, but with compassion. You feel what others felt, not to suffer, but to grow. And in this growth, the witnessing becomes more than observation. It becomes revelation. You begin to understand the sacredness of the life you just lived, the meaning behind the moments you overlooked, the beauty, even in the mundane. And even if the way you died was difficult, you begin to see that how you transitioned was only one part of the journey, not the defining one. So no, the soul does not suffer the way you think. It doesn't flail in agony. It doesn't scream through the ether, it watches, it remembers, it reorients, and eventually, it releases. From this higher perspective, you begin to grasp that death isn't a singular event. It's a sacred unfolding, a series of unveilings. And each layer brings you closer to truth, closer to the realization that you are not the burned body, the crushed shell, or the still heartbeat. You are the eternal witness, the conscious observer, the soul that cannot be destroyed. And what you feared most, pain, terror, the abyss, was never the real end. It was a doorway. One that, once passed through, reveals something so beautiful, so intelligent, so profoundly loving, that you wonder how you ever feared death at all. The moment the final tether loosens and the soul drifts beyond the threshold of physical form, something extraordinary occurs. Not abrupt, not jarring, but profound. There is no more weight, no more urgency, no more noise. The world that once pulsed with heat, pressure, and chaos fades into the background like the last echo of a storm retreating into silence. And then, like the slow unveiling of a hidden door, the light appears. This is not the light of fire. It does not flicker or consume. It does not burn. It does not threaten. It doesn't crackle or roar or devour the air around it. This light is different. You don't see it with eyes. You feel it with every fiber of your being. It surrounds you without enclosing you. It pulses with familiarity, as though you've been here before, as though this place, Rex, this presence, has been patiently waiting for your return. And in that moment, you understand something that every soul eventually remembers. The light has never left you. You only forgot. It has been trailing you in silence through every lifetime, through every pain, through every act of love, and every moment of despair. Now, free of the body's limitations, you are finally able to see it again, not as an idea, not as a metaphor, but as a living, radiant reality. The light isn't white like snow or golden like the sun. It's a hue that transcends the spectrum. It vibrates with intelligence, with mercy, with memory. As you drift forward, drawn by a magnetic pull that doesn't force but invites, you notice that the space around you begins to take shape, not in solid forms, but in energy, geometry, color, and sound. This is the corridor of light, not a tunnel, not a void, but a passageway of exquisite harmony, as if the universe has constructed a welcome bridge between your former existence and the infinite waiting beyond. What's striking is that there's no fear here. None. The fear belonged to the body, the brain, the stories you carried. But here, in this corridor, there is only remembering. The light does not demand anything from you. It does not judge. It does not replay your life in shameful fragments or test your worth. That's not how this works. This isn't a courtroom. It's a reunion. With every moment that passes, you feel your vibration increasing. You are becoming lighter, yet more whole. More aware, yet less burdened. You begin to realize that the light is not separate from you. It is not a destination. It is a mirror reflecting your truest, most untouched essence back to you. There's a clarity here that transcends language. Thoughts don't race. They emerge as knowing. Time doesn't tick. It opens. There's no confusion about where you're going. You're not wandering. You're being received. It feels as though this path was prepared specifically for you, designed with precision to echo your soul's unique frequency. The corridor does not overwhelm. It harmonizes. For those who suffered physically, violently, or suddenly in the moment of death, this passage is a balm. It softens the imprint of the trauma. It brings peace not through erasure, but through expansion. You begin to see that what you just experienced, that moment of burning, of fire, was not the end or the enemy. It was an unlocking, a rapid release. And now, within the embrace of this light, you are held in a way that the human mind could never fully articulate, not as a victim, not as a ghost, but as a being returning to truth. And you are not alone. Within the corridor, presence begins to gather, not in the form of crowded beings or unfamiliar shapes, but as waves of recognition. You begin to feel the presence of others, untan, souls you've known across lifetimes, guides you've sensed in dreams, ancestors whose blood once ran through your veins. They do not startle you. You do not question who they are. You know, you recognize them the way the ocean recognizes its shore. The love that emanates from them is overwhelming, but not heavy. It lifts you, it affirms you. They are not here to pull you forward or push you back. They are here to celebrate your return. The further you move through the corridor, the more the boundaries of self begin to soften. Not to erase you, but to expand you. You still feel your individuality, your soul essence, your memories, but now they're held within something greater, a collective field, a divine intelligence, a tapestry of consciousness far more vast than any life could have contained. And the light keeps welcoming you deeper. This corridor, no man, this sacred passage, is not a hallway of judgment, it is a restoration, a reclamation. Here, the soul begins to shed the illusions it once wore like armor, the need to be enough, the guilt, the fear of death, the confusion about purpose. All of it begins to dissolve, not in force, but in presence. The light doesn't have to explain anything, it is the explanation. Being inside it answers every question you've ever asked without a single word spoken. Some souls describe it as warmth, others as music. Some feel it as a soft breeze, a hum, a glowing wave of recognition. What's universal is this: the light always welcomes, no matter how you died. No matter what you believed, no matter what you carried. The corridor is not a reward, it is not a privilege, it is a birthright, one you forgot, and now, in this moment of return, are remembering once again. It's here that something else begins to occur, not forward movement exactly, but deepening, a subtle inner turning. As though the light itself begins to open portals within you, doors you didn't know existed. You begin to feel an awareness blooming inside of your consciousness, a recognition of why you chose your most recent life, why you came through the fire, why you agreed, at the soul level, to such an intense transition. And then it dawns on you. The light is not just guiding you, it is revealing you. The you beneath all masks, the you that spans lifetimes, the you that cannot die. For some souls, this is where they pause, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. The corridor of light becomes a space of reflection, of healing, of gathering oneself. Others are gently ushered onward, into the deeper planes, monod, into healing realms, libraries of memory, or reunions with higher aspects of self. But no one is forced, no one is judged. There is only truth, unfolding. Back on earth, those left behind mourn a tragedy. They see the fire and weep. They relive the final moments and ache with questions. But here, inside the corridor, the soul is no longer touched by that perception. What they left behind was the illusion of ending. What they've entered is the continuum of being. There is one final truth the corridor whispers into you before you move beyond it. It is soft, but undeniable. The fire was never the final word. It was the punctuation before the beginning of the next sentence. You were not burned away, you were called home. To the ordinary eye, fire appears as a destroyer, a force of violent undoing, consuming all it touches. But in the deeper realms of spiritual understanding, fire has never been merely destructive. It has always held a dual role, both destroyer and purifier, both ender and initiator. And when a soul exits this life through the flame, what unfolds is not simply death, but transmutation. You've likely heard that word before, not transmutation, but not fully realized what it implies on a soul level. It means transformation at the most fundamental level of being, not just change, but elevation. Not just release, but refinement. To die in fire is not to vanish in smoke and ash, but to pass through one of the most ancient spiritual gateways known to mystics across time. Fire is the element of alchemy, and when the soul is met with fire in its final, earthly moment, something sacred begins. This isn't metaphor, it's spiritual physics. Fire has been revered in esoteric traditions for centuries, esoter, as the bringer of truth, the revealer of what is hidden, the eliminator of impurity. In almost every major mystical system, fire plays a central role in rites of passage, in offerings to the divine, in purification ceremonies that aim to strip away illusion and bring the seeker closer to source. Why? Because fire doesn't just destroy, it reveals, it clarifies, it refines by burning away the false and leaving only the essential. When a soul exits through fire, the body may perish, but the consciousness passes through a sacred process few understand. At the exact moment the fire consumes the flesh, the soul is presented with a mirror, a cosmic mirror held up by the element itself. Not a mirror of shame or judgment, but one of deep clarity. Everything the soul has carried, fear, guilt, egoic weight, unresolved patterns, ID, begins to loosen. Fire, in this context, is not punishing the soul, it's liberating it. There is a reason why fire is used in cremation across many cultures. There's a reason it's been chosen by priests, sages, and shamans throughout history. Fire is swift, it is final, it is honest. It brings closure not just to the physical, but to the energetic. The remnants of a life are released in smoke, not as loss, but as offering. It is said that smoke carries prayers to the heavens. But what if that smoke also carries remnants of unprocessed karma? What if the very act of burning helps to dissolve old patterns clinging to the soul's field? From this perspective, death by fire is not a random or meaningless end. It is a karmic release of a very specific kind. And in certain ancient teachings, whispered, not shouted, it's understood that this form of death clears vast amounts of karmic residue in one act. It doesn't make it desirable in the human sense. But it does mean that souls who transition this way are often moving through a gateway of accelerated purification. The flames don't just dissolve the body, they burn away the illusions that were hardest to let go of. And this isn't about suffering. Remember what we've already explored. The soul does not remain in the body as it burns. The suffering we imagine is largely a projection. The soul has already been displaced, gently, compassionately, and now it hovers in a realm where it can perceive the flame not as torment, but as a teacher. In this space, you begin to understand what the fire is doing on a spiritual level. It is returning you to your essence. Many initiates of ancient traditions spoke of the fire trials, symbolic experiences of intense transformation, where one's lower nature was burned away so that the higher self could emerge. Sometimes these were rituals, sometimes dreams, but in rare and powerful cases, the physical body became the offering itself, not as punishment, as passage. These were not accidents. They were understood as a fast track through the wheel of suffering, a spiritual release valve for souls ready to transcend deeply embedded karmic imprints. You may ask, why fire? Why not water, or wind, or earth? Each element holds its own mysteries, but fire is the only one that leaves no form behind. It reduces everything to its essence. Water cleanses, yes, but it preserves. Earth holds and contains. Air lifts and moves. But fire transforms. And this is what makes it the element of ultimate alchemy. When the soul witnesses its own transition by fire, something primal awakens. You begin to remember the ancient symbology your spirit already knows, that fire was always meant to be a passage, not a punishment. In mythologies around the world, heroes pass through fire to emerge reborn. Phoenixes rise from their own ashes, prophets speak from burning bushes, monks walk across coals. The message is always the same: fire strips away what is not real, so that what is eternal may rise. And so, when someone dies by fire, it is not the end we think it is. It is not simply destruction. It is purification. It is an ancient rite, performed not in a temple, but on the sacred altar of life itself. The soul, once separated, enters a space of heightened clarity. It sees, in a single moment, what might have taken lifetimes to unfold, and in that flash, many burdens are burned away. The need to repeat certain patterns, the weight of generational wounds, the old stories of identity and shame. The fire claims them all, not to harm, but to free. In this way, fire acts as a final teacher. It asks nothing of the soul except surrender. It does not demand struggle. It offers release. And though the image may be violent to those left behind, what the soul experiences is something else entirely. A sacred alchemy, a crossing through flame into freedom. There are even ancient texts that suggest fire as a path for the initiated, not in the literal sense of seeking death by it, but in the metaphorical sense of burning through illusion in life so thoroughly that physical death becomes a formality. And in the rare cases where literal fire plays a role in the soul's exit, it is sometimes viewed, in those hidden teachings, as the soul's agreement to undergo the most intense purification all at once. A graduation of sorts, a cleansing so complete that much karmic baggage is neutralized in a single exit. This doesn't mean the soul becomes instantly enlightened, but it does mean it moves forward with less weight. It passes into the next realm with more clarity. It has already shed so much, not just through death, but through flame, and what remains is the raw self, the true self, the immortal essence. So, what appears to be destruction is actually sacred transmutation. The fire does not end the soul, it refines it, it lifts it. It purifies what was ready to be released, quickly, completely, and with divine precision, long before you drew your first breath, before you ever opened your eyes to the light of this world, or felt the warmth of a human touch, or heard your name spoken aloud. You were somewhere else. Not lost. Not floating aimlessly in some endless void, but aware, whole, surrounded by a knowing far deeper than anything language could ever capture. And in that place, that sacred dimension beyond time, you made a choice, not out of fear, not because of karma demanding punishment, but because your soul saw something few others see. You saw the possibility of profound transformation through an experience so intense, so purifying, that it could release you from lifetimes of entanglement in a single flame-lit moment. This is the truth that most of the world will never dare to consider. That the soul is not randomly tossed into tragedy, that what looks like misfortune through human eyes may be divine intention in disguise, that even something as extreme as death by fire may not be a cosmic accident, but a path chosen with immense love, courage, and higher wisdom. You see, before incarnating into this world, the soul sits at a kind of crossroads, not of punishment or reward, but of purpose. Here, surrounded by guides and higher aspects of itself, it begins the sacred work of life blueprinting. It reviews lessons not yet learned, karmic threads not yet resolved, strengths waiting to be awakened. It sees the energetic patterns left from previous lives, the cycles, the habits, the wounds passed from one incarnation to another, and it begins to ask the deeper question, how can these patterns be released? That's where the soul contract is born. A soul contract is not a rulebook, it is not a punishment assigned by some cosmic judge, it is a conscious agreement, crafted by the soul, for the soul. And sometimes, when a soul reaches a point of readiness, it no longer wishes to repeat the same slow steps of healing. It doesn't want to spend 10 more lives unraveling a knot that could be burned through in one. It wants acceleration, it wants light, it wants liberation. That's when the soul chooses a path that, from the outside, looks unbearable. But from the soul's vantage point, it is not horror, it is alchemy. The fire, though terrifying to the human mind, becomes a spiritual crucible, a sacred flame that doesn't destroy, but purifies. The soul does not seek suffering, it seeks transcendence. And for some, that transcendence can only be found in the intensity of fire. Now, you might wonder, why would any soul choose such a thing? Why not learn through peace, through beauty, through gentler means? And the answer is, many do, but every soul carries a different vibration, a different lineage, a different set of echoes from past lives. Some have lived lifetimes of avoidance, silence, and slow unraveling. Some have danced with the same shadows for centuries, and when the moment comes to break free, truly free, the soul chooses a path that will burn away all that no longer serves. This isn't a decision made lightly. The soul knows the weight of what it's agreeing to. It understands the trauma it may leave behind for others. It sees the difficulty, but it also sees what lies beyond it. It sees what becomes possible on the other side. And so, with reverence, it signs the contract, not with ink, but with light. You didn't come here to suffer. You came here to transcend. Let those words sink into your bones. Let them echo across every painful memory, Every moment you or someone you love has questioned why such a death would be allowed, or worse, deserved. It was not a punishment. It was not meaningless. It was not forgotten by the divine. It was chosen, with courage and clarity, by a soul that longed to break free. Karmic acceleration is not something many speak of, but it is real. It is the soul's way of fast-tracking evolution by facing the most concentrated form of transformation. Fire, being one of the 4 primal elements, has long been associated with purification in every mystical tradition. It is used in sacred rituals, in spiritual cleansing, in symbolic rebirth. But in this case, it becomes literal. The body may not survive, but the soul does more than survive. It awakens. What's even more powerful is that this choice often ripples far beyond the soul who made it. The energy released in such a transition touches others, family, friends, witnesses. It awakens grief, yes, but it also awakens questions. Questions that lead to seeking. Seeking that leads to healing. Healing that echoes through generations. In this way, the soul who chooses such a departure becomes a catalyst not just for their own evolution, but for others as well. And those left behind, though shattered by the loss, are often the ones whose consciousness begins to open because of it. They begin to see beyond the veil. They begin to search for meaning in places they never would have looked before. The pain cracks them open, and the light gets in. So perhaps now you can begin to view this differently. Perhaps now, when you think of someone who passed through fire, you won't see them as a victim of circumstance. You'll see them as a soul so ready, so willing, so brave, that they chose a passage most could never imagine choosing, not because they were broken, but because they were ready to be whole. And if you're hearing this now, there's a reason for that. Maybe someone you love chose this path, and you've been haunted by the thought of what they went through. Maybe you've carried guilt, confusion, unanswered prayers. Maybe you've wondered if they were in pain, if they were afraid, if they were lost. They weren't. They were going home, by a path their soul had already chosen. A path that, to the human eye, looked like destruction, but to the soul, looked like release. Or maybe this message is for you. Maybe your own soul has been stirring, remembering something you haven't quite been able to name. Maybe in your quiet moments, you've felt a pull toward the fire. Not literal flames, but the metaphorical kind. The kind that asks you to let go of everything you thought you needed in order to become who you really are. If that's true, then understand this: the fire isn't your enemy, it's your initiation, and it doesn't always look like tragedy. Sometimes it looks like change, like loss, like the collapsing of a life you once thought was secure. But when the fire comes, it is not there to punish you, it is there to make you new. Your soul is wiser than you know. It has seen the map, it has written the agreements, it has chosen the teachers, the turning points, the portals. It knew that this life, this incarnation, would carry its own form of fire. But it also knew that you were ready to rise through it. You didn't come here to be burned, you came here to burn away everything that is not your truth. And now that you're remembering that, everything begins to change. You do not cross over alone. That idea, that myth of isolation, of dying into darkness, into silence, into nothingness, one of the greatest untruths humanity has ever been taught. It's the fear that keeps so many from living fully, that in the end, you'll be alone, that when your final breath leaves your body, you'll vanish into a void, unseen, unsupported. But the truth is something altogether different, something more beautiful than most people can imagine. Because, when your soul separates from the body, something begins to stir on the other side. A movement, a shift, a preparation, and then, a gathering. It begins softly, not with trumpets or theatrics, but with a knowing, a pull, a vibration that grows in clarity as your awareness expands. You may not even realize it's happening at first. You're hovering, witnessing, acclimating to the strange but familiar sensation of being weightless, bodiless. You're realizing that you still are. And then, from the edges of that realization, comes the presence. Not one, not vague light, but many. A field of presences drawing near. This is the gathering. And it happens for every soul. The ones who come are not strangers. They are your soul family, the ones you've known beyond time, beyond form. You may not remember their names or faces in this life, but your soul knows them intimately. They've walked with you through countless incarnations. They've been your parents, your children, your lovers, your mentors, your friends. And now, as you release this life, they return, not to mourn your death, but to welcome your return. Imagine the way a child runs into the arms of a parent after being away at school for years. Multiply that reunion by eternity. That's the energy of the gathering. It's not cold or clinical. It's not judgmental. It's warmth, recognition, radiance. You are met not as a sinner or a saint, but as a traveler, returning from a long and difficult road. And they don't just meet you at the threshold. They surround you. They stabilize you. They hold you in an energetic embrace that helps you remember who you really are. You see, when you cross over, your consciousness is expanding rapidly, but it can still carry residues, confusion, fear, emotional remnants from your life. The gathering helps dissolve all of that. Not by erasing it, but by overwhelming it with love. Unconditional, undiluted, uncompromising love. Among these presences are your guides, beings who have been with you since your incarnation, many of whom you've never seen in the physical realm but have felt at key moments. The ones who nudged you to make a better choice, who whispered in your heart when you were lost, who stood just beyond the veil every time you cried out in the dark, even when you didn't think anyone was listening. They're here now, not as distant energies, but as tangible presences. They don't always look human. Some appear as light, some as colors. Some you'll see in forms your soul finds comforting, familiar faces, perhaps even drawn from memory or imagination. But the feeling they carry is unmistakable. Guidance, guardianship, devotion. And then there are the ancestors. Not just the ones you knew in this lifetime, but the long line that stretches back through centuries. Your bloodline, your spiritual line. The ones who paved the path before you. The ones who made sacrifices, endured hardships, and prayed for descendants they would never meet. Some you will recognize instantly. Others will feel like memories you never had. But they are yours. And when you see them, you'll feel the echo of their lives inside your own. The traits you carried. The wounds you inherited. The strengths they passed down without ever speaking your name. Now they're here, proud and joyful, to witness your homecoming. But the most breathtaking part of the gathering is not just who comes, it's how it feels. This is not a quiet room where you're expected to sit and reflect in silence. This is a reunion, a celebration. It's music, not from instruments, but from energy itself. The feeling is so complete, so all-encompassing, that words will never capture it. You're not just welcomed, you're remembered. You're seen again in your wholeness, and in their presence, you begin to remember yourself. This is the moment the illusion of separation starts to collapse completely. In life, you believed yourself to be isolated, distinct, a single consciousness moving alone through space and time. But now, surrounded by those who have loved you across lifetimes, you realize that was never true. You were never alone. Not for a moment. You were always tethered to something larger. And this radiant embrace, is the proof of that. Even souls who die suddenly, tragically, in fear or violence, are not left to drift. The gathering still comes. If anything, they come even faster. Because the trauma of a sudden passing can disorient the soul, make it cling to what was just lost. In those cases, the gathering envelops the soul like a warm ocean current. Guides may speak gently, reminding the soul it is safe. Ancestors may show the soul glimpses of past lives, future possibilities, helping it orient beyond the physical. And soul family surrounds with such unconditional presence that the fear begins to dissolve. There is nothing rushed about this process. There's no push to move on, no pressure to ascend. Everything unfolds according to the soul's readiness. But one thing remains constant: no one crosses alone. Even the most isolated soul, the one who died believing they were unloved, forgotten, or unforgivable, they are met. Not with judgment, with welcome, with a depth of compassion that defies everything they believed about themselves. That's what makes this moment so transformative, because in life, most people carry the weight of believing they are not enough. Not good enough, not spiritual enough, not worthy enough to be loved after death. But when the gathering arrives, all of that is burned away. Not with shame, but with truth. The truth that your essence was always love, that you were never abandoned, that you are more than enough, you are infinite. And the gathering doesn't end quickly. It stays with you as you transition through the layers of the afterlife. It stays as you review your life, as you explore the next realms, as you prepare for whatever comes next. Some members of your soul family may continue with you, others may step back after their part is complete. But the memory of that reunion remains etched in your consciousness. A reminder that death is not a departure, it is a return. This is why the souls who have crossed over are so often at peace. Why so many near-death experiences come back forever changed. Because they felt it, they were held, they were welcomed, and in that moment, something healed that 1,000 lifetimes of striving never could. So when you think about death, one, yours, or someone else's, remember this: the last breath is not an end, it's an opening, a doorway into a space where love is not just felt, but embodied, where every fear, every sorrow, every belief in separation is met with a greater truth. And that truth is simple, eternal. You never walk alone, you never have, and you never will. After the light has wrapped itself around you and the corridor of return has revealed its truth, something even more mysterious begins to unfold. You don't just drift endlessly into eternity. You are guided, delicately and intentionally, into a space that has been prepared for you long before your earthly body ever encountered its final moment. This place exists not in space, not in the way physical minds understand it, but in vibration, in essence, in resonance. It is a realm built not from matter, but from meaning. Here, in the higher dimensions, lie the healing realms. Not heaven in the way you may have been taught, not a paradise with pearly gates or harps, but a sanctuary of unimaginable gentleness and grace. These realms are not destinations, they are transitions. They are not rewards, they are recalibrations. Designed with incredible intelligence, they exist solely for the purpose of helping the soul remember its wholeness after intense departures, especially those involving sudden, violent, or traumatic exits from the body. When a soul leaves through fire, even though it is protected from the full brunt of the physical pain, there can still be a kind of energetic shock that echoes through its subtle fields. Not because the soul is fragile, but because the density of what it just moved through lingers. The soul needs time, not time as measured in minutes or hours, but in frequency, time to reorient itself to its natural vibration, to shake off the remnants of fear, the dissonance of confusion, the attachments still lingering from the life just left behind. And so, it is brought here. You are not brought in alone. As you enter the healing realms, you are surrounded by presence. Not the same light beings who accompanied your exit from the body, but other intelligences, caretakers of energy, architects of harmony. They greet you not as a broken thing, but as a beloved traveler who has returned home from a long, difficult journey. There is no sadness in their eyes, only reverence, only honor. You feel, instantly, that you are seen for everything you are, not just what you experienced, but what you became through it. The realm itself responds to you. It is alive, though not in a biological way. The very light here adjusts itself to your signature. The colors shift to match what brings you peace. The textures, Wembian, if they can be called that, soften to your soul's frequency. The sounds are more like vibrations, ambient currents of harmony that don't enter through your ears, but through your whole being. There are no harsh edges, no cold surfaces. Everything is fluid, soothing, responsive. You are brought into a chamber, though calling it a chamber feels too limited. It is an energetic cocoon, a sacred nest where your soul can be wrapped in frequencies of remembrance. In this space, nothing is asked of you. You don't have to explain what happened. You don't have to process it mentally. The healing is not cognitive, it is vibrational. Layers of your energy field begin to untangle, slowly at first, then with increasing ease. The trauma that may have clung to you, not as emotion, but as energetic tension, begins to dissolve. There is a light here, unlike the one from the corridor. This one is more focused, more intimate. It works like a balm, a living presence that moves through your energetic body with loving precision. Wherever there is distortion, it realigns. Wherever there is fragmentation, it weaves wholeness. You are not being fixed, you are being remembered into yourself. This process is not rushed. The soul is never hurried through healing. There is no pressure to move on, no sense of should. You rest as long as needed. In some cases, souls spend what feels like entire seasons here, absorbing the frequencies they require to be fully restored, not because they are broken, but because they are valuable. Sacred things take time to recalibrate. You may wonder what happens during this restoration. It's difficult to describe in linear language, but it can be said this way. Your soul regains its clarity. The clarity of who it was before the density of physical life began to dim its awareness. You remember your purpose. You remember your origins. You remember why you chose the incarnation you just completed, and why it ended the way it did. This understanding doesn't come through thinking, it comes through resonance. Truth simply settles into you, like sunlight warming a cold surface. Sometimes, during this phase, souls are visited by others, members of their soul group, mentors from higher realms, even those they've left behind. These reunions are not dramatic, they are tender, simple, complete. There's no need for long explanations or apologies. Everything is understood in a single moment of shared vibration. The energy of love is so palpable, so all-encompassing, that any residual pain dissolves instantly in its presence. For those who left through fire, this realm offers something especially profound, a cleansing of energetic memory. You see, even when the soul has been protected from the full force of physical suffering, it may carry echoes of fear from the final moments of the body, not as wounds, but as imprints. These imprints are gently lifted, as if divine hands are washing away ash from something golden underneath. What remains is not trauma, but transformation. You may think of this as a kind of spiritual debriefing, rests, but not one that burdens or analyzes. It is more like waking from a long dream and being embraced by someone who says, "You did beautifully, you're safe now, you're home," and you feel it. Deeply. Irrevocably. The most astonishing part of these healing realms is what happens toward the end of your stay. There comes a moment, subtle yet unmistakable, when the soul feels itself rising into its full luminosity, not because it is being given anything new, but because it has been cleared of everything false. The light inside is not being added to, it is being unveiled. What was always there is now fully accessible. You realize, in a way that stirs tears even here, that nothing was taken from you, not your life, not your light, not your wholeness. Everything that mattered was carried through. Everything that felt lost has been returned in a purer form. The fire didn't destroy you, it refined you. You're not scarred, you're shining, and as you prepare to leave the healing realms, there is no reluctance, only readiness. You've been uplifted not by force, but by love. You've been restored not by forgetting what happened, but by understanding what it meant. Now, healed and whole, you're ready for what comes next. Whether it be your next journey in the soul realms, your return to another incarnation, or your new role as a guide for others still navigating the illusions of physical life. The healing realm fades, not as something left behind, but as something that has now become a part of you. You carry its frequency wherever you go next. You carry the memory of being held, of being healed, of being deeply known. You are not who you were before the fire. You are more. There are certain deaths that don't just end a life, they awaken something eternal within the soul. Death by fire is one of them, not because it's brutal or extreme, but because of what it doesn't leave behind. You might expect fire to scar a soul, to traumatize it, to imprint terror deep into its energetic field, but what actually happens is the opposite. Fire doesn't brand the soul with suffering, it marks it with light, When a soul exits through fire, it undergoes a kind of spiritual crystallization. The body perishes quickly, but the soul passes through a vortex of intense elemental energy. And that passage, through flame, through heat, through transformation, leaves an imprint, not one of damage, but of activation. The fire, in a strange and sacred way, refines the soul like gold in a furnace. It burns away the dross, the heavy emotional layers, the stubborn densities, and leaves behind something more rare, more tuned, more vibrant. This mark of light is subtle, but profound. It's not visible in the way you might imagine. You won't see it as a glow or a flame hovering in someone's aura, but its presence is unmistakable in the lives that follow, because souls that have crossed through fire don't come back unchanged. They return with something extra, something ancient, something encoded. In many traditions, it's understood that each element imparts a different gift when it's part of a soul's transition. Water brings depth, sensitivity, emotional wisdom. Air brings clarity, detachment, the gift of communication. Earth brings stability, embodiment, strength. But fire brings awakening. Fire forges insight. Fire opens inner sight. Souls who have passed through fire in a previous incarnation often return with heightened intuition. Their inner knowing is sharper, quicker. They may not always know why they sense things the way they do, why their dreams come true, why they can feel someone's truth before it's spoken, but the sensitivity is real. It's been coded into them, burned into their blueprint, not as a wound, but as an upgrade. These souls also tend to carry a strong affinity for light, not just in the physical sense, but in the symbolic sense. They are drawn to illumination. They gravitate toward truth, healing, higher awareness. Even if they don't consciously identify as spiritual, there's a magnetic pull toward purpose, growth, and sacred work. You can often spot these souls in childhood. They ask big questions early. They feel the pain of others deeply. They see through deception instinctively. They carry a quiet depth that sets them apart. And often, without understanding why, they are drawn to healing. Not always in formal ways. Sometimes it's subtle, a presence that soothes, a touch that calms, a voice that steadies others. Sometimes it's more direct, my lines, becoming therapists, energy workers, spiritual teachers, doctors, or artists who heal through their craft. But beneath it all is a common thread, the desire to bring light where there has been darkness, to bring wholeness where there has been fragmentation, to transmute pain into something higher. This is the gift of fire. It doesn't just consume, it consecrates. It transforms what seemed unbearable into something sacred. And that transformation leaves a signature. Souls who carry the mark of fire often carry a mysterious inner strength, not the kind that seeks conflict, but the kind that endures through storms. It's a quiet resilience, a sense of having already faced the worst and survived. But here's the part few understand. This mark of light is not born of the trauma itself. It's born of what the soul did with it. It's born of the transmutation. The fire is not the gift. What is forged in the fire is. In alchemical terms, this is what the ancients meant when they spoke of turning lead into gold. But they weren't talking about base metals. They were talking about consciousness. They were talking about the soul. Earthly fire forges spiritual gold. And when a soul chooses, some higher level, to end its physical journey through fire, it enters into a powerful alchemical process. The body dies, yes, but something within is set ablaze. And that blaze doesn't extinguish with death. It carries forward. In future lives, this fire may manifest as a burning desire to know the truth, to strip away illusion, to live with intensity and purpose. It may come as a refusal to settle for surface-level existence. These souls often carry a restless energy, a yearning to remember something just out of reach. They don't like being told who they are. They seek experience, depth, connection, to something bigger than what the world offers on the surface. And underneath that yearning is the residual memory of having passed through something unspeakably sacred. A memory not always accessible in words, but felt in the bones. Sometimes these souls are drawn to literal fire, 90 noun, to candles, to hearths, to rituals involving flame. They may light candles without knowing why, feel drawn to fire ceremonies, or feel comfort in the warmth of burning light. This isn't random, it's resonance. Their soul remembers. The flame is not a threat to them, it's an ally, a teacher, a reflection of their own inner transformation. In the ancient mystery schools, initiates would sometimes undergo symbolic deaths, ritual immersions in the elements, visionary journeys into the underworld. These were not meant to traumatize. They were meant to awaken, to strip away all that was false so that the real could emerge. And in this context, death by fire is one of the most powerful initiations a soul can undergo. Not because the body burns, but because what is born from that experience is something extraordinary. These souls are often called to serve, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Somewhere deep within, they know they've been given something precious, a clarity, a light, and they feel compelled to share it, to hold space for others in their darkness, to walk with those who are afraid of transformation and whisper, "I've been through the fire, and you will not be lost." That is the ultimate legacy of fire, not destruction, but guidance. These souls become beacons, they become lighthouses for others passing through their own storms, not because they are perfect, but because they've touched the edge of annihilation and returned carrying light. So, if you've ever met someone who carries that unexplainable inner fire, that glow that doesn't come from charm or success, but from depth, you may be looking at someone who carries the mark. Someone who crossed through the flames once, long ago, and came back not broken, but blessed. Someone whose soul still glows, quietly, with the memory of fire. There comes a point, after the soul has rested, healed, and remembered, when something new begins to stir within it. Not a longing to return to what was, but an awakening to what can now be given. No longer weighed down by the density of form or the imprints of trauma, the soul begins to emanate something unmistakable, a frequency shaped by fire, refined by courage, and anchored in compassion. What was once an experience of burning becomes a signature of light, not a scar, but a beacon. And with that light comes a calling. These are not ordinary souls. They are not diluted by fear or confusion. They have walked through one of the most intense forms of earthly transition and emerged, not damaged, but deepened. Their essence now carries a resonance unlike any other, one that whispers, "I've been there." And because of that, they are uniquely qualified to serve others in ways that even the most ancient beings of light sometimes cannot. These are the guides of the flames. When a soul exits physical life through fire, and when it completes its healing and remembrance, there is often a quiet invitation waiting. It's not forced. It's not a demand, but many accept it with humility and love. The invitation is this: to become a guide for others still navigating the fear of death, especially those who carry deep anxieties around violence, sudden departure, or suffering. In accepting this role, these souls don't return to Earth right away. Instead, they step into a kind of cosmic mentorship, not in a hierarchical way, but as a loving presence that walks beside those still in the midst of forgetting. You may wonder how this guidance works. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. These souls don't appear as visions or speak in thunderous voices. They whisper through intuition. They press gently on the heart when someone needs strength. They bring dreams filled with comfort. They soften the fear that grips a person for no logical reason. And most of all, they sit silently beside those who are passing through the very kinds of exits they once endured themselves. They do not stop the death, that is not their task, but they ease the passage. They bring light to the in-between. What makes their guidance so powerful is that it comes from embodiment. These souls know what it's like to feel the heat of panic, the suddenness of separation, the questions that arise in the moments before death. They know what it's like to cross that threshold without a chance to say goodbye. They know what it's like to leave behind others who may never understand. But they also know the truth that waits on the other side. And they carry that knowing like a torch. Their energy is unmistakable. It feels like warmth with depth, like fire that doesn't consume but comforts. They often appear in dreams to those facing terminal illness, violent environments, or death-related phobias. Not always visibly, but energetically. They appear in moments of prayer, in flashes of courage, in the sudden calm that comes before a great transition. They are there when a person who should be afraid suddenly feels peace. They are there when someone overwhelmed by grief feels a warmth in their chest and doesn't know why. Many souls on earth who have irrational fears of fire or of sudden death are connected, often unknowingly, to one of these guides. The fear isn't always rooted in trauma. Sometimes it's a pre-life agreement, an invitation to connect with one of these elevated beings for spiritual protection and remembrance. Through that connection, healing occurs on levels the conscious mind may never even detect. And it goes further. These souls don't just help with the transition out of life. They also serve as catalysts for transformation within it. Fire, after all, is not just about death. It's about renewal, rebirth, clearing. And so, many of these guiding souls become muses for those who are awakening. Writers, healers, artists, visionaries, many of them unknowingly channel the frequency of a flame walker, a being who has risen through fire and returned not only whole, but luminous. That energy infuses their work, often without words. You can feel it in a poem that ignites something ancient in your chest. You sense it in a piece of music that brings you to tears, though you don't know why. You hear it in the voice of someone who speaks about grief, but somehow makes you feel hope. They are working through us, not to control, but to remind. To remind us that no death is wasted, that no ending is meaningless, that even the harshest transitions carry within them a purpose, a perfection we cannot always see, and they guide us toward that seeing, one heartbeat at a time. Not every soul who passes through fire takes on this role. Some return to other realms, some reincarnate, some serve quietly in the etheric layers of the earth, helping balance its elemental forces. But many do choose to become these guides, and when they do, their light changes, it deepens, it stabilizes. They become like standing torches in the landscape of human evolution, not flashy, but eternal, not loud, but undeniable. They hold the vibration of transformation itself, and wherever there is fear of death, they bring the frequency of release. You may have felt them already. Maybe in a moment when you should have been terrified, but weren't. Maybe during a dream you couldn't quite remember, but woke up from with tears in your eyes and warmth in your chest. Maybe in the way you've always felt something sacred about fire, even if it frightened you. Maybe in the part of you that seeks to help others through their darkest hours, not because you learned how, but because something inside you already knew. These guides often carry a distinct soul signature, one of courage, compassion, and quiet clarity. They do not preach, they do not perform, they serve. They move through realms assisting those who are dying, those who are grieving, and those who are ready to awaken. And when their work is complete, they often return to the soul realms for replenishment, only to emerge again when needed. There's something poetic about it, isn't there? That a soul who left the world through flame becomes a guide to those trying to survive it. That the very thing that ended their life becomes the light they offer to others, not in fear, not in pain, but in power. The fire did not destroy them, it forged them. And now, they burn with a different kind of flame, one that never harms, one that never fades. It is the flame of remembrance. The flame that whispers to those still caught in illusion, "You are not alone, you will never be alone," and this too can become light. When a soul returns to the physical plane after passing through fire, it does not come back unchanged. That kind of transition leaves a spiritual fingerprint, not a scar, but an awakening. A deeper sensitivity, a kind of energetic refinement that follows the soul like a secret memory. And while the conscious mind may not recall the exact moment of death, or the journey through flame, the imprint remains. It travels with the soul, weaving itself into the threads of the next life, not as trauma, but as purpose. These souls often reincarnate with unusual traits, and you can feel it in their presence. There's something unmistakable about them, a quiet intensity, a warmth that doesn't burn but heals. They carry within them a resonance, a vibrational quality that is hard to name but easy to feel. It's the kind of energy that enters a room before they speak. You might not know why you're drawn to them, but you are. There's light in their eyes, not just intelligence, but illumination, and that light is not metaphorical. Souls that have passed through fire often return with a heightened connection to light in all its forms. Some are literally drawn to it. They love the sun, firelight, candle-lit rooms. They may find deep comfort in warmth, both physical and emotional. Others embody light in their creativity, painting with brightness, expressing through vibrant tones, crafting ideas that seem to shine. Still others channel it through healing work. Their touch warms, their words comfort. Their presence feels like standing in morning sun after a long night. This connection to warmth isn't random, it's residual, it's remembrance. Somewhere in their being, they remember the fire not as a destroyer, but as a purifier. They remember the moment their soul lifted from burning flesh, not in agony, but in transcendence. They remember the gathering, the light, the homecoming, and that memory becomes fuel. In future incarnations, it becomes the spark that ignites their life's mission. Many of these souls return as artists, not always in the traditional sense of painting or music, but in the broader sense of creation. They feel called to shape reality with their hands, their voices, their visions. They mold beauty out of pain, meaning out of mystery. You'll often find them drawn to sacred geometry, to ancient symbols, to metaphysical truths that seem to come naturally. They don't always know where their inspiration comes from, but they feel it flowing through them, a current, a warmth, a fire that doesn't consume, but awakens. Others return as healers, not necessarily in hospitals or clinics, though some do take that path. Often, their healing is energetic, emotional, or spiritual. They know how to listen in ways most people don't. They understand grief without needing the story. They offer presence that feels like medicine. And they are often the ones people turn to in times of crisis, not just for advice, but for calm. Their gift isn't learned, it's remembered. And it comes from having been on the other side of pain, having been refined by it, not destroyed. Still others come back as inventors, visionaries, spiritual teachers, or activists. They feel driven to light a fire in the world, to wake people up, to push humanity toward something higher. These are the souls who don't settle for mediocrity. They question everything. They see patterns where others see coincidence. They aren't satisfied with surface answers. And often, they carry a sense of urgency, as if they know time is precious, and their work here is sacred. That urgency comes from the fire, from knowing how quickly life can change, from having already been through death and realizing what truly matters. These souls tend to mature quickly. Even as children, there's a depth to them. They often feel like old souls, observant, empathetic, sometimes overwhelmed by the intensity of the world. They may struggle to fit into systems that feel shallow or disconnected. They may feel isolated, misunderstood, or out of place. But as they grow, they begin to recognize their sensitivity not as a flaw, but as a gift. And once they embrace it, something incredible begins to unfold. Their lives aren't always easy. Carrying the energy of fire means carrying transformation, and transformation often brings challenge. These souls may face early losses, intense emotional shifts, or periods of profound confusion. But these experiences aren't punishments, they are catalysts. They are echoes of the soul's past transition, reminders that they were not reborn to live small, quiet lives. They were reborn to ignite something, and when they find their path, when they align with the deeper mission their soul carried in, everything changes. Their presence becomes undeniable, their work becomes magnetic. Whether they're creating, healing, teaching, or simply living with authenticity, they leave a mark. Not because they're trying to, because they can't help it. Their very being carries the imprint of fire, and that imprint radiates. You'll often find that these individuals are drawn to spiritual medicine, not just healing others, but healing themselves. They may be attracted to plant medicines, to shamanic rituals, to ancient modalities that speak in symbols and sensation rather than logic. They trust intuition, they follow energy. They feel truth in their bodies before they understand it in their minds, and they are rarely satisfied with surface-level healing. They want depth, they want transformation, they want to touch the core. That's because the soul that has passed through fire knows what it means to be stripped bare. It remembers what it is to have nothing left but essence. And that remembrance fuels a hunger, not for material success, but for wholeness, for integration, for the kind of life that reflects the soul, not just the ego. And even when they don't know where it comes from, even when they can't explain the dreams, the visions, the feelings that rise for no reason, they trust it. Because deep down, they remember, not with the brain, but with the soul. They remember rising from flame. They remember light. They remember what it means to be born again, not through comfort, but through sacred fire. And so, they live with reverence, not always for religion, but for life, for energy, for the unseen forces that shape this world. And they teach others, often without meaning to, that pain can be a passage, that endings can be beginnings, that fire does not just destroy, it awakens. When you meet someone who carries this spark, you'll know, not because of their words, but because of their presence. There's something in their eyes, a softness that comes from surviving the unimaginable, and a fierceness that comes from refusing to let it define them. They are here for something more, not because they're better than others, but because they remember. They remember the fire, and they came back carrying its light. When you stand outside the flame and look in, all you see is destruction, a body engulfed, a life consumed. You hear the crackling roar of fire, you imagine the unbearable, the panic, the pain, the final moments wrapped in terror, and because you are human, because you love, because you feel, because you empathize, your mind immediately fills in the blanks. It concludes what must have happened based on what it saw. You grieve not just the loss, but the way in which it occurred. The horror of it leaves an imprint on your heart, and understandably, you begin to believe that the soul must have suffered as much as the body appeared to. But that belief, as real and logical as it seems, is built upon a very human illusion. In this dimension, suffering is almost always equated with what the eyes can see. Pain is assumed to be a direct result of what the body is enduring, and in many cases, that's true. In ordinary life, a physical wound brings physical pain, a traumatic event brings emotional shock. But when death approaches, when the body begins to reach its limits, and the soul begins to stir, something begins to shift. Something most people never see, something most people never consider. The soul begins to rise before the final moment. And the agony you imagine, that scream locked inside your chest when you picture someone being consumed by fire, is not what the soul is experiencing. What you are witnessing is the final breakdown of the physical form. But what the soul is living through is liberation. Let that land. There is a point where consciousness disconnects from sensation, where the soul, knowing it is time, begins to step outside the body, while the body continues to endure. And in cases of death by fire, this often happens very quickly, faster than the eye can detect, faster than the brain can process. In some cases, the soul lifts out even before the body is overcome, observing the final moments from a distance that feels both close and eternal. What looks like horror from the outside is often transcendence from within. This truth is not meant to dismiss the grief or the reality of human loss. It's not meant to minimize the deep pain of those left behind. But it is meant to pierce the illusion that keeps so many trapped in fear, the illusion that a tragic death must mean a tragic ending, that the soul is helpless, writhing inside a body it cannot escape, that what we see happening to flesh must be happening to spirit. It's not. The soul is far more intelligent, far more attuned to energy than we allow ourselves to imagine. It knows when to release. It knows when to shift its awareness. It knows how to dissolve its connection to nerve and bone and brain when those structures are no longer able to serve it. What remains is presence, not pain. Peace, not panic. And it goes deeper. The soul doesn't just escape suffering, it often witnesses its own transition with a kind of awe, as if watching a sacred ritual unfold. There is clarity, there is stillness. There is a sense of being held by something vast and luminous. The soul is not writhing in the fire, it is already being lifted through light. From this higher vantage point, the soul sees what others cannot. It sees the energetic design of the event. It understands that its exit, though shocking in physical terms, was aligned in ways the human mind may never grasp. There is no anger, no resentment, no need to assign blame. The soul sees that the moment of death was not random, not chaotic, but part of a wider unfolding, a divine rhythm stretching across lifetimes. And yet, for those still rooted in the third dimension, that doesn't seem possible. We look at the flames and think, how could anything divine come from this? We witness the ashes and wonder, how can this be part of a soul's journey? But that question comes from looking through the lens of form, not essence. The third dimension teaches us to equate death with tragedy, especially when it comes through something violent or abrupt. And yet, from the soul's perspective, the method of departure is simply a mechanism, a doorway. Some souls exit through sleep, others through illness, others through sudden release. Each path holds its own wisdom. Each path was chosen, on some level, for a reason. And the fire, though it appears to destroy, actually purifies. Think of what fire represents in spiritual traditions across the world. It is the element of transformation, of release, of clarity. It burns away illusion. It reveals the essence. In rituals, fire is used to transmute the dense into the divine. And so it is with the soul. When death comes through flame, it is not a punishment, it is a sacred passage. The soul walks through that passage not as a victim, but as a traveler returning to light. And something else happens here. Something almost no one talks about. The fear of such a death, Rover, the horror that grips the collective psyche when someone dies this way, is not just about the event itself. It's about our disconnection from the soul's reality. If we truly remembered who and what we are beyond this body, we would see death not as defeat, but as return. We would see the fire not as an enemy, but as a revealer. And we would no longer be bound by the illusion that the worst thing that can happen to the body is the worst thing that can happen to us. You are not the body. You are not the skin, the voice, the breath. You are not the hands that once touched, the feet that once moved. You are the awareness behind the eyes, the light behind the words, the witness within the storm. And when that awareness has completed its purpose in a particular form, it leaves, not in terror, but in truth. So when you hear stories of those who have passed through fire, let your heart remember what the mind cannot see. Let yourself feel into the reality that lies beyond the illusion. Know that while the world may mourn a tragedy, the soul may be rejoicing in freedom. What looked like an ending was an arrival. What looked like agony was transcendence. And if the image still lingers in your mind, the moment of flame, the imagined suffering, place this truth beside it, that the soul, in that very moment, was being embraced by something infinite, that it had already begun to rise, that it was not alone, that it was not afraid, that it was being met by light. This truth matters, because the more you understand the difference between what you see and what is, the more peace you carry, not just for those who've passed, but for yourself. You begin to trust the journey. You begin to loosen the grip of fear, and you begin to sense the divine intelligence working even in what seems chaotic. Death by fire is not what it seems. It is not the brutal end of a helpless soul. It is the return of a brave one. What if everything you believed about death was incomplete? What if the fear you've carried, the terror of finality, of pain, of vanishing into darkness, was built on illusions passed down through generations that never truly knew what lies beyond the veil? The truth is far more expansive, far more beautiful, and far more liberating than you've been told. Because you are not your body. You are not the heartbeat, the breath, the fragile skin that changes with time. You are not the story others see. You are something else entirely, something unshakable, something eternal. You are awareness. This is not just a comforting idea, it's the spiritual foundation behind every sacred teaching that's ever touched the edge of the divine. You are the witness behind the eyes, the stillness beneath the storm, the light that continues even when the flame goes out. And once you realize that, truly feel it in the center of your being, death loses its grip on you, especially the kind of death the world tells you to fear most. Fire, destruction, violence. You begin to see that even in those moments, especially in those moments, something holy is unfolding. Not an end, a return. There is nothing more powerful than the realization that you cannot be destroyed, that the true you, the awareness behind your thoughts, the presence behind your name, cannot be burned, broken, or silenced. It can only transform. And when you understand this, the world softens. The edges of your fear begin to blur. You stop seeing death as a cliff and begin to see it as a doorway, a passage, a continuation of something vast and sacred that you've been a part of long before you ever took your first breath. So much of the fear around death comes from the illusion of separation, the belief that you are this body, this identity, this temporary role moving through a chaotic world, alone and at risk. But that was never the full picture. The body is a garment, a sacred one, yes, but a garment nonetheless. And like all garments, it eventually wears out. But you remain. You are not the flame that flickers. You are the fire that never goes out. Especially for those whose lives end in dramatic ways, those who leave this world through fire, through chaos, through violence, there's a tendency to fixate on the moment of death, as if that moment defines everything. But it doesn't. That final scene is not the whole story. It's not even the most important chapter. Because the soul is already moving, already rising, already witnessing from a space of peace the moment the body begins to break down. The fear we project onto those transitions comes from our limited view, from our attachment to form. But the soul doesn't see it that way. It experiences expansion, release, revelation. And so, if you've ever lost someone suddenly, someone who suffered, someone whose exit seemed brutal or unfair, know this. They were not lost in the way you feared. They were received, lifted, welcomed. What looked like chaos from here was a return from there, a homecoming so rich in light, so drenched in peace, that even the hardest death becomes something holy. When you begin to accept this truth, not just mentally, but in your bones, your entire life begins to shift. Fear loses its power. You begin to live more freely, love more openly, take bolder steps toward your soul's calling. Because the shadow of death no longer haunts you. You see it for what it is, a transition, a continuation, a dissolving of form, not of being. You realize that every ending is also a beginning, every death births a new unfolding. The fire that ends a life does not end the light that animated it, it merely sets that light free. And that light goes on into new dimensions, new forms, new expressions of love and wisdom and service. The most sacred truth you can ever realize is this: you are the eternal flame, not the flicker, not the wax, not the smoke. You are what endures, what watches, what rises. And once you feel that truth inside you, death, even in its most fearsome form, becomes a companion, not a threat. A sacred closing of one chapter so that another can begin. This doesn't mean you won't grieve. It doesn't mean you won't feel the pain of loss or the sting of goodbye. But it means that beneath that grief, there is something unbreakable, a knowing, a peace, a fire that keeps burning even when everything else falls away. And this knowing doesn't just change how you die, it changes how you live. When you know you are eternal, you stop wasting time on the surface, you stop chasing empty things, you return to what matters, to love, to connection, to truth. You begin to listen to the quiet voice within, the one that's always guided you, always known what you came here to do. You make different choices, you speak with more intention, you love more deeply. Because you realize that every moment is part of the sacred, every breath is a miracle, and death is not a thief, it is a mirror. It reflects back the life you've lived, and it asks you, did you love well? Did you grow? Did you remember who you are? If you have, then death becomes nothing to fear, and if you haven't, it's not too late. Because every breath, right now, is a chance to remember, to choose, to come home to your truest self before your soul ever has to leave this body. So let this be your liberation. Let this knowledge free you from the fear that has kept your heart small and your dreams postponed. Let it remind you that no fire can touch what you truly are. That even the most dramatic ending cannot diminish your infinite nature. You are not the smoke, you are the light within it. You are not the shell, you are the flame that continues. And when your time comes, whenever and however it comes, you will not be alone. You will be met, you will be seen, you will be remembered, and you will remember that you were never the body. You were never the story. You were always the soul, and the soul does not end. So take a breath now, not in fear, but in power. Let it fill you with the ancient truth that has been whispered in temples, sung in stars, and etched in your very DNA. You are the eternal flame, and you were never meant to be afraid.